And how can this affect children as they get older, like if they had no arts programs at all?
Well, we already are seeing it in the people that are actually young teachers. And a whole generation in the state of California didn't have arts programs in their schools. So that all started with Prop 13 over 30 years ago. So when property taxes went down and the schools had less money to work with, out went all the arts and music programs. So this is really nothing new. But you've got a whole new generation of people that have passed through schools in the entire state of California, and as a result of Prop 13, they never had any arts programming. So the myth is that anybody that's really good at the arts, any kind of arts, it's because somehow they were blessed, or that they're just talented, when in fact you may not have even been given the opportunity or exposure. You don't even know what you missed. So that's the tragedy, is that you've got a whole new generation of teachers that never had it themselves. They're afraid of the subject. They don't feel at all confident about their own creativity, so they don't know how they're going to be able to teach it to their kids. So it's this perpetual thing this has been a long time in the making.
Okay, can you just give me a little bit of background on what Prop 13 was?
Prop 13 was the idea of a California folk hero by the name of Howard Jarvis, and he, at the time, it's who could dispute that Californians were paying too much for their property taxes every year. When their houses would be more valuable, they'd end up paying more in property taxes. And he said, no more. We're not gonna do that. We're gonna cap this. And he got a great, there's a lot of people in the state of California that supported that. And so Prop 13 passed, and it was like the people's prop. But there were all these unforeseen consequences that happened. So if you bought your house for $50,000, after Prop 13, you didn't have to pay any more taxes on your property, even though the value of the house went up. So my neighbor, who's been the original owner in Reseda, he's been there forever, and he doesn't pay any more on his property taxes. But because I bought my house 10 years ago, the value of the house is much more, so I pay more in property taxes. So that just means that our schools are just not getting the kind of funding that they need, so the campuses literally are falling apart. So we've got all kinds of structural problems that need to be addressed, but there's no money for that. They keep doing, passing bonds and stuff to patch things up here and there. But because of the lack of funding, then the arts programs all just left the schools in the entire state.
Okay, and as a parent, what would it be like if your children didn't have arts programs while they were growing up?
My kids, well, the reason why I started this nonprofit is, I was inspired to do it for my own son because he's a really creative guy. And I just wanted him to be able to have what I had as a kid. It's just that simple. But as a parent, I'm going to make sure they're going to get all those things anyway. So if it's going to be in school or out of school, they're going to have all of that. But I really feel, to the core of my being, that okay, I'll take care of my own kids, but what about everybody else? That's what I'm in it for. I want to make sure that as many kids as possible in the San Fernando Valley had what I had as a kid growing up. Simple enough, but it all comes down to money.
Okay, and you were previously a cartoonist.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think, or how hard would it have been to become a cartoonist had you not had the, your arts background to begin with? Well,
I probably would have felt like such a freak in school that I would have never even become a cartoonist. But because of the time, it was the 70s, and I had all these arts opportunities and all this community support, it was fully expected of me to become a cartoonist. I mean, even from the time I was a real little kid, people knew that I was going to do something. So there was all this push for me to do whatever I wanted to do with my art. I probably would have really disappointed people if I hadn't gone the direction that I went in. But I often say that if I were a kid in today's school system and public education, if I didn't have a family that understood me and supported what I was about, and had teachers that understood and supported me, I would be labeled special ed and, you know, probably put on medication and maybe even put in a special classroom, I don't know. And I think that is just like the worst tragedy of all, the consequence of the lack of arts education programs is that kids are being misdiagnosed for having all kinds of learning disabilities and behavioral problems, and they're just not getting art and PE. That's it. So it's something that I'm very, very concerned about as an arts activist and as just a community leader in the San Fernando Valley.
Okay. Today there was an article in the LA Times about how children are watching anywhere from 28 to 32 hours or more of television a day. How do you feel about this?
Well, I tell my kids TV just makes you stupid. So that's the word. They're not really allowed to use the word stupid, except when we're talking about TV. Because with both of my kids, my older son, I really watched the TV intake. And that was easy to do because I only had one child. And then when I had my daughter, you know, I'm just not as strict about the TV time. But she does understand that, you know, that she has to be a discerning viewer, if you will. But I try not to let them, they don't watch network TV and all this crazy stuff that's, you know, that homes today are just being pumped with. It's ridiculous, really, when you think of the imagery that these kids are surrounded with all day, every day. Okay,
and what direction do you see society moving if children are forced to stay in classrooms or forced to only study and they lose all their, you know, creative outlets?
Oh, geez, that's just the saddest thing. I say for the individual, I see spiritually dead people. I see people who have no idea, who don't know who they are, that are just total conformists, who may never find what they were born to do. As a society, I think the United States is in really big trouble if we don't get it together, because the solutions to all of our problems are not going to be found inside of a school day. That, you know, the answer is not going to be in a bubble on a standardized test. You know, kids have got to learn how to think outside the box and go for thoughts and ideas that haven't already been thought of or done before. And that's what the arts do, and that's something that people don't fully understand. So part of what I also try to do with this nonprofit is educate the public on what arts education means. It's not just finger painting at school. It's really, truly exercising the right side of the brain and taking risks and looking for solutions outside of the box.
Okay. Previously, there was an act, the No Child Left Behind Act, and can you just briefly explain basically what that did for schools?
Well, again, that happened right at the same time that Arts and Ed started, and my son started first grade, so he was on the front lines of the No Child Left Behind Act. And I am not a fan of No Child Left Behind. You know, the problems with the lack of creativity in the classroom and arts education programs, compounded by this No Child Left Behind, is just making it so much worse for right brain thinkers. And it's terrible for teachers, because you've got all these talented people who are really creative, who've been doing this thing, teaching for years and years and years. All of a sudden they're being told, teach to this script, make sure these kids all make the grade. If you don't, the school's report card at the end of the year is going to suffer, and that's going to mean trouble for everybody. So even the brightest and the best teachers are forced to have to conform to this program where they're constantly just teaching to the test. So they really don't have a choice. Otherwise, you know, the kids aren't going to make, you know, they're not going to meet that script. So that makes it worse for creativity in the classroom. It's worse for the kids, and it's worse for the teachers, because they don't get to be creative in their teaching. And it's also bad for the arts, because the teachers need so much time to prep those kids for the tests. So that squeezes out field trips. It pushes out arts programs, because those teachers need every second to get those kids ready for that test.